Let us now pray. O Almighty God, as we have come together to begin our meeting of the Assembly, we humbly beseech you to grant to all our members the light and guidance of your Holy Spirit, that we may wisely take counsel together and come to such decisions as shall promote your glory and the well-being of all our citizens in this our land, so that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be enjoyed by all people. Grant this for the sake of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Oath of allegiance of a new member. Announcements by presiding officer.
Members, a request for leave from the 23rd sitting, from this 23rd sitting has been received from the Minority Councillor and approved. I wish to extend deepest condolences on behalf of the members of the House and on my own behalf to the families of Councillor Dr. Anselm London and Carl Cupid, both of whom served Tobago through their presence in the Assembly Legislature. Councillor Dr. Anselm London served as the Secretary of Finance and Enterprise and must be commended for his sterling contribution to the development of Tobago. He always believed that the economic potential of the island and its people is limitless. As we remember him, let us all strive to give life to those beliefs. Carl Cupid served as a reporter who rarely missed a legislative sitting while he was in active duty, and who could always be counted on for his written contributions to upholding the principles of democracy. Honorable members, join me in a moment of silence to pay tribute to these two stalwarts of the House in their respective capacities. May their souls rest in peace. Members, in 8 days, we celebrate International Women's Day. I therefore take this opportunity to wish all members who are women happy International Day. And on behalf of all members of the House, to extend same wishes to the spouses of the members, the clerk and staff, all women across the Tobago House of Assembly, and women in general across the island. The theme, Balance for Better, urges everyone to do our part in building a gender-balanced world. I would also like us to consider that balance for better can also be extended to our personal lives as we balance wellness, family, and work for better health and future. As I close, I wish to welcome the observers in the gallery who are from the constituency offices and the Safety Committee, Health and Safety Committee, and to extend best wishes to all for a safe and enjoyable carnival season.
Assembly bills are sent back from Cabinet. Assembly bills brought back from Parliament. Petitions, papers.
Finance and the Economy, I would like to lay before this Honorable House the Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at end of January 2019.
Presentation of reports from Dispute Resolution Commission, Select Committees, Code of Conduct. Questions to secretaries. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by secretaries or assistant secretaries. Personal explanations. Introductions of bills. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Assembly and moved by a secretary or assistant secretary. Public business. Executive Council business. Motion.
Assistant Secretary in the Division of Community Development, Enterprise, and Labor.
Presiding Officer. Firstly, let me begin by declaring the awesome privilege and honor that I now enjoy, having been called upon to lay this motion in the House today. After 2 years in office, and by no means attempting to criticize, I feel it is representative of the best move towards a possible future which allows for young people to exercise their fullest potentials and to be given an opportunity to articulate their positions and their concerns. While I must admit that I am not in the best of health today, permit me, Madam Presiding Officer, to lay the motion to the House and to address my concerns succinctly. Whereas Tobago's economic development has been primarily driven by a combination of efforts by the Tobago House of Assembly and the central government, and whereas in many newly developed cities and countries, the creative class has been identified as a dominant driving force in their economic development, and whereas an emphasis on human capital development over the last 2 decades have resulted in an exponential increase in university graduates as well as opportunities for vocational skill development. And whereas this Executive Council has accepted as part of its mandate to advance a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry, particularly among the youth on the island, which would in turn significantly contribute to the economic development of Tobago. Be it resolved that this House supports the work of the Executive Council in its attempt to foster a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry on the island, particularly among the youth. And be it further resolved that this House invite the youth of Tobago to embrace the opportunities for development through innovation, creativity, and industry. Madam Presiding Officer, some 2 years ago, when this administration assumed office, we did so against the backdrop that we were devoted and dedicated to the task of improving the quality of education on the island of Tobago, inclusive of vocational training. That we were dedicated to the concept of improving the quality of our health services and healthcare delivery. That our attention was fixed on creating a robust private sector, and ensuring that there is such thing as light manufacturing and specialized services on the island of Tobago. To do that, Madam Presiding Officer, this administration would have forged strategically ahead to implement and institute certain bodies and certain task force. To name a few, I remember speaking very early on the motion which spoke to the establishment of the Community Consultative Planning Unit, an organism which would have seen its operation within communities to ensure that persons, all stakeholders, all community groups, and all interested parties would have had an opportunity to inform the strategic developmental agenda of this present administration as it pertains to their particular interests and their needs. Madam Presiding Officer, in like manner, I would have had an opportunity to speak on the motion which sought to create, as it were, the Tobago Community Action Network model, which we loosely call the TCAN model. We would have looked at best practices gleaned from other territories, including the United States, Europe, and other Caribbean territories, Madam Presiding Officer, because we understand, as it were, that the best way to sustainable development for a country, an island, or a people is block by block, community by community. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, having laid the foundation, I feel overwhelmingly honored today to be able to champion a motion which calls for greater youth participation and involvement in respect of innovation, creativity, and industry. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, it was just last year, and I want persons to be able to appreciate the context, because if we cast our view back sufficiently long without laboring too much on the past, we would appreciate that this administration is a strategic administration, and that anything that is championed by this present administration under the auspices of the Honorable Kelvin Charles is always with purpose and with a sense of strategy. So, Madam Presiding Officer, last year we would have laid in this House the appropriation bill, they call it, the financials, under the theme we spoke loosely to unleashing the creative and innovative capacities of our people. Today, Madam Presiding Officer, we are here because we have built upon that. We have used those foundations to create an architecture and to engineer a machinery that will allow for the youth of the island of Tobago to get involved in constructing a future worthy of their own potentials. You see, the criticisms may have come from persons far and wide, suggesting that after 2 years, we perhaps would have had very little to show, and after an entire financial year, which called for the unleashing of creative and innovative capacities, that we have very little to show. But I can say with certainty now, Madam Presiding Officer, while it is true that Rome was not built in a day, it is truer to say it was built day by day. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, as we cast our attention now to the present day and to our future possibilities as enshrined in this motion, I want to remind the people of the island of Tobago, those who hold positions of authority, those who sit in offices of influence, those who serve as community leaders and elders, that if ever there was a time to get on board, the time is now. That if ever there was a time to mobilize your forces and to stand in solidarity with young people in order to reshape and rebrand this Twin Island nation, that time is now. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, when one looks at the motion, and I will try to run through this thing strategically, when one looks at the motion, one could appreciate that the role of the Tobago House of Assembly in collaboration with the government certainly has not been in vain. That when we look back at the recent history from 2001 to now, we can recognize that we would have forged ahead and gone ahead to ensure that persons would have had access to a certain quality of life. or infrastructural developments will advance in such a way as to ease persons, not just in their commuting on our roadways, but to be able to access agricultural lands, to be able to access their home dwellings, and to be able to access their loved ones. Madam Presiding Officer, we can speak to these developments by way of roadworks, by way of building, by way of communication, by way of transportation, the establishment of the cove, and we can go on, and we can go on, and we can go on. But remember, the primary purpose of this administration was to ensure that the pillars articulated from very onset were strategically implemented to redound to the benefit of the people of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, I am very happy that today a fifth pillar has been added, and that pillar speaks to the establishment of this youth framework that would allow our young people to have better opportunities in the future. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, in one of my recent walks as an area representative, I came into contact with a young man in Blackrock in particular, young Mr. Lincoln, I think his surname was. And he said to me, he said, Mr. Hector, I want to be a paleontologist. I said, hey, we're getting somewhere, man. Because when I was your age, all I wanted to be was an adult. I just wanted to grow up. But here was this young man, a primary school student, speaking volumes to the fact that he is beginning already in his formative years to construct a life based on purpose and based on the potentials he believed himself to have resident on the inside. And he had my admiration and my respect. Because when I look back and I examine my own life, I can't say with certainty, and even if I were to speak in what the court would call an affirmative reality, it can't be the truth that I can say that when I was 9 years old, I had a clear idea as to who I want to be or what I want to become. In fact, when I was 9 years old, they tried to temper my mettle, to put it mildly. But Madam Presiding Officer, if you think that that was encouraging, that this young man at 9 years old knew exactly what he wanted to be because he wanted to dive into our history and understand who we are as a people, where we have come from, how far we have evolved, and how far we have to go. It was more overwhelming when I met further down the road a young man whose name I sadly can't remember, and he said to me, he said, "Sir, I know you, you know." I said, "You like me?" Speaking in our language. He said, "Oh, kinda." I said, "So, if you kinda like me, that means you don't want to be like me?" Well, I was pleased when he said no, only because he wants to do something that nobody else has done before. So I began to investigate the thing and find out, well, what is this something that nobody else has done before? And he said, "Well, I don't know." And I could jump to his defense now and say, perhaps he does not know because it was not done. And that we would know what is this thing that has not yet been done when finally he has an opportunity to do it. And Madam Presiding Officer, the reason why I was overwhelmed is because recently I was told of a story and I recited it at a place not too long ago of a young student who in a classroom was told to think of a beautiful thought, a wonderful thought, and then draw or sketch that idea on a piece of paper. And this young girl sat quietly in the back of her room, scribbling on a paper. In the teacher's mind, she was known for not being a participating student, for being very introvert and not willing to participate in the activities of the classroom. And so the teacher, conscious of the student's history, which is unfortunate, said to her, what are you doing there? You're wasting your time again. And the little girl, in her own defense, said, no, miss, well, I joined this thing. So the teacher, examining her work, said, and what is this? And the little girl said, God. The teacher, a little less annoyed now, asked the question. She said, but nobody knows what God looks like, so how could you draw God? And the young girl said, well, now everyone will know what God looks like. And you see, Madam Presiding Officer, we could frown on opportunities like that and associate it with idleness and loss of opportunity and time off task. But the lesson to be learned from this young girl who drew a picture of God and created for the first time a physical representation of what God would look like in the world of a child goes to the head of the class in my world, because she would have done the unimaginable and the unthinkable. And this is what the motion is calling for today. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, the time has come on the island of Tobago for us to begin to reconcile our culture and our history with innovation, industry, and creativity. The time has come, Madam Presiding Officer, for us to begin to move away from those traditional courses of study and those traditional types of career in order to give us an opportunity to buoy our economy, to buoy ourselves, and to re-establish and perhaps move ourselves further up on the chain of innovation in the world's stage. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, there is a correlation between creative industries and cultural identities. You see, there was a time in our nation's history when the narrative of the island of Tobago was based on a stereotype that suggests in Tobago there was only run sheep and goat seasonally and participate in their heritage as the promotion of their cultural identity. In fact, I like Chinamanda and Amanda, who challenged the concept of a stereotype and said the danger with a stereotype is not that they are untrue, but that they are unfinished. You see, because a stereotype allows for one story to become the representing story. Take, for example, the concept of poverty. That if your parents are poor, it is believed by stereotypical thinking that you will be doomed to a life of gloom and doom. But, Madam Presiding Officer, we know all too well, and we can look at the statistics now and see that the creative industry is now being recognized as one of the leading economic drivers in developing countries as it pertains to financial restructuring of their operations in developing countries. Madam Presiding Officer, I always have to think of this thing in the context of innovation and creativity. Because it was Theodore Rivette who puts it this way. He said the main difference between creativity and innovation is the focus. He goes on to say, what is often lacking in creativity is not the idea created in its own sense, but the innovative part which puts the idea into action, bringing to bear, bringing into fruition the actual work. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, I know because I've had conversations with a few people. I know that we have this wealth of creativity resident on the island of Tobago. And the time has really come for us to give voice and to give opportunity and occasions for that to be realized. That is why I can't help but feel a sense of joy when we consider the YES program as facilitated by the Division of Finance and the Economy that causes youth to be energized for success. And Madam Presiding Officer, I dare say that I had an opportunity to sit in one of the sessions, I think it was the Word of Work program by Youth Affairs. And the focus of that program was not so much equipping persons to become employable, but helping them through employment to begin to champion their own forms of industry and to be able to open their own businesses. The focus was entrepreneurial. And Madam Presiding Officer, we happen to now live in a day, in a world, and in an age where creativity is now the goal of the economy. Let me cite some figures here so that we can appreciate that. According to NASA, the arts and the cultural sector is a $730 billion industry, which represents 4.2% of the GDP, and this information has been ratified by the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. We can go on. It is in the UK where formidable emphasis is placed on youth economic empowerment that they confess that young people, youth entrepreneurship, youth creativity, and youth innovation is now the driver of economic development and reinvigoration. Madam Presiding Officer, according to the UK independent analysis of the economy, the creative industry generates 84 billion pounds per year at a disaggregated amount of close to 10 million pounds per hour. In other words, Madam Presiding Officer, while our history and while our lived experiences would have warned us to compel and inspire and encourage our youth to pursue traditional types of careers, the doctors and the lawyers and the engineers and the likes, we see here, Madam Presiding Officer, that in the UK, it is the creative industry that is revolutionizing the economies there. And all of this must be seen, Madam Presiding Officer, in the context of the strategic development goals. Because when one looks at it and we look at the fact, the information is here. Let me tell you, in Trinidad and Tobago, I have information here about the total number of graduates who would have accessed certain courses. In vocational training and the performing arts, 392 individuals. In engineering, 136 individuals. In biomedical sciences, 10 individuals. In chemistry, 6. In environmental health, 2. In medical technology, 7. In nursing oncology, 173. In nursing oncology, 3. In physiotherapy, 10. And the numbers go on, and they go on, and they go on. But, Madam Presiding Officer, I want to make a little boast. Because while in these formal courses of academia, persons have been graduating reasonably well with 392 in vocational and the performing arts, here on the island of Tobago, through the Division of Community Development, Enterprise Development and Labor, we have been able to graduate upward of 1,000 persons in 2018 in various disciplines in vocational skills training, and these persons are now positioning themselves to revolutionize the way they think about the economy and their contributions towards it. It goes without saying, Madam Presiding Officer, that if ever there was a catalyst for innovation, creativity, and industry in the national arena, in the national community, Tobago has to be it. But one can't just stop there and say, well, the persons, they master some skills in batiking, and they would have done some tie-dyeing, and they are now winemakers, and they can make cakes and pastries and the likes, and some have gone into photography and the likes. Madam Presiding Officer, We are beginning to dive deeper into this thing because we've recognized that there is now a place, there is now a slot which allows for areas such as filmmaking to revolutionize the way we operate and to give persons greater opportunities. You see, the truth is this, as painful as it is to confess, no government anywhere, no administration anywhere will be able to create the level of employment opportunity that is needed to treat with the needs and the interests of the people that they preside over. The truth is that we have to begin, Madam Presiding Officer, to link persons with opportunities in such a way that they begin to create further opportunities for themselves and guarantee for themselves and their families the quality futures of which they are deserving. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, when one looks at the whole concept of filmmaking, this is now an integral part of the creative society and the innovative industry simply because the world has come to appreciate characterization as a dimension of creative genius. And if we have to reconcile the fact that the wider world has reconciled characterization to creative genius, then one will be able to appreciate that our folkloric culture, our heritages, our traditional festivals, the way we share our stories and the oral traditions and the likes now have an opportunity to find themselves in an international market to generate revenues and to change the possibilities of the future for persons who wish to participate in those. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, no longer should we begin to see so rich a culture and so creative a history as entertainment and old story. The time has come for us to package this, the time has come for us to export this, and the time has come for us to benefit significantly from it. And I could tell you a few examples of persons who would have done that, of territories which would have done that. But before I tell you that, I have to put it in the context, and I am quite hoping that we will be able so to do, to look at it in the context, Madam Presiding Officer, of perhaps establishing a task force or some similar kind of organization that could develop, as it were, a Tobago charter for a national youth development policy. From my research and my studies, Madam Presiding Officer, I would have gleaned an appreciation for the Youth Economic Empowerment Plan by the UK. Europe would have established a creative program. They would have established a national youth development policy. The United States of America would have established a youth and economic empowerment program. There were the establishments of online resources and databases which allowed for youth to link themselves and their interests to opportunities. It is an online resource on youth workforce development, entrepreneurship, and financial inclusion. But the one that I love the most, Madam Presiding Officer, is by the Republic of South Africa, the Department of Trade and Industry, in their establishment of a national youth empowerment strategy for an implementation framework. The period 2009 to 2019. You see why this is important, Madam Presiding Officer, is from the research they were able to appreciate that persons under the age of 25 represent in developing territories, in developing countries, almost 50% of the population. And in some instances, 60% is represented by that number. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, it behoves the government there and then to begin to come up with plans and policies to ensure, Madam Presiding Officer, that they have an implementation framework that spoke to young people having an opportunity to live out their fullest potential. It brings us now to the second whereas, which speaks to the creative class. And I want to appeal to young people in particular to get on board with this, and to parents and to teachers, to begin to appreciate the need for the establishment of a creative class. You see, because what this does, Madam Presiding Officer, is that it gives the individual an opportunity to define their own scope of work, to articulate and define their own hours of engagement, and to still be more productive than persons who are confined to set hours of engagement. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, if persons are like me, I somehow seem to work better in the wee hours of the morning. As a student myself, I always find myself to engage myself in more meaningful academic work about 2 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. back to day clean. Now, if that were not the case and I were engaged in this creative class, this industry, which would have allowed for that kind of engagement, then I could have comfortably seen myself with this kind of knowledge and this kind of opportunity running a business at 2 a.m. my hours and being more productive than if I were to report to an 8 a.m. job where I am, well, sort of, not as good as I should be. But the fact is this: what it requires, therefore, in order for this creative class who can now define their own space and create their own opportunities, what it insists upon is a measure of self-control and discipline. You see, because the level of input would determine the level of input, what benefits are derived. And so if I know as an individual that through this creative class, in the establishment of this creative industry, that I can generate $30,000 in 8 hours, why would I want to work for 4? Why would I want to work for 4 hours? I will commit myself to that because that $30,000 comes directly back to me. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, it speaks, therefore, to the need for curriculum redesign, re-implementation, and change. There was a time when persons who accepted or accessed vocation skills training were seen as the underclassmen. We've come a long way from that today. Because if by no other standard I can speak articulately and confidently about the MIC Institute of Technology Vocations Training Institution, which offers a graduate an opportunity to be certified both by the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago and by the German Institute of Trade and Technology, and they would have, of course, had an apprenticeship opportunity. It means, therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, that an individual who holds such a certification would then have an opportunity to apply their craft, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in any Commonwealth nation or any CARICOM member state. You see, we have to begin to appreciate this thing that allows for us to think that opportunities that are located elsewhere erodes your sense of patriotism and nationhood. In fact, Madam Presiding Officer, the world is now appreciating the whole concept of the global citizen simply because they understand that opportunities must be pursued even if it means to the end of the world, to the end of the earth. Opportunities must be pursued. In preparing for this, I had an unfortunate conversation, but one that I could now appreciate, with a young man who said to me, "Well, you see me and that? Oh, so good, yes. Oh, so good, yes. They just talk all kind of thing." And he was speaking in the comforting language about patriotism and nationhood and these kinds of things, but that if you want a good job, you have to migrate, you have to travel. I want to say to him again, as I would have said then, what about the Asians and they, whose economy represents one of the strongest economies on the world, but they are in every country on the face of the earth? It doesn't erode their sense of national identity and national pride and patriotism. And the time has come for us to begin to appreciate and recognize that we can locate ourselves anywhere in the global community and still have an unparalleled affinity to the land of our birth. That is the true concept of patriotism, that despite where I am put into service and where my skills are put into practice, I will be able to lend myself to the development of my home, of my country, and of my community. Madam Presiding Officer, it is said that diversity and multiculturalism, an appreciation rather for diversity and multiculturalism, is the birthplace of creativity and innovation. I don't know whether or not that is true, and I did not spend sufficient time trying to find out if in fact it was. What I do know is that as we pursue opportunities for a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry, we have to appreciate diversity. It is the government of Zimbabwe, in their construction of a youth policy that allows for innovation and creativity towards the establishment of a creative class, who put emphasis on diversity and gender equity and equality that would allow for persons to intermingle and interact, because they understand that no government, no country can develop sustainably on only part of its human resources, a fraction of its human resources. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, as I seek to bring this into a more focused presentation, I want to really appeal to persons. I want to appeal, as getting some opposition from the member here, perhaps he didn't appreciate the use of the word more, a more focused presentation. I wish to appeal to parents, to teachers, to community leaders, to members of the political arena, to any influential person. Do not misrepresent the possibilities that can be had in the creative economy. Do not allow for persons to think that an approach or an appreciation for culture and the arts is for a second-class man, an underclassman. That it is a second chance to live, a second chance to be, a second chance to become. In fact, we should begin now to inject in their little minds, in their consciences, the fact that they can become the very best of anything that they can imagine. That if you are interested in dance, that if you are interested in filmmaking, that if you are interested in animation, if you are interested, Madam Presiding Officer, in storytelling, that you can be able to create a life from this passion, from these interests, and that persons have already begun, persons who are well established with degrees like myself, have already begun to seek out opportunities to transfer their hobbies, which they would have done for fun, leisure, and recreation, into income-generating possibilities and opportunities. So, my dear friends, the appeal is being made that as we consider education and vocational training and skills acquisition, that as we consider curriculum redesign, re-implementation, and change, that as we reconsider the whole concept of inclusion and diversity and multiculturalism, that as we consider ourselves as being representative of the global citizenry as part of the global community, that as we begin to consider lifestyle choices and wellness and the likes, that as we continue to recognize that all of us must play our part in ensuring that we are financial citizens, that as we continue to recognize the relationship between creative industries and the overlap that we do from cultural and creative opportunities, that as we begin, Madam Presiding Officer, to build a nation of ideas that speak to a creative class and a creative economy, ours is the responsibility, each and every one of us, to champion the message out there and to call for support that persons will come on board. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to articulate, to re-emphasize this resolution, that this House supports the work of the Executive Council in its attempt to foster a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry on the island, particularly among our youths, and that we further be resolved that this House invite youth of Tobago to embrace the opportunities for development through innovation, creativity, and industry. I thank you.
Members, the question proposed. Whereas Tobago's economic development has been primarily driven by a combination of efforts by the Tobago House of Assembly and the central government, and whereas in many newly developed cities and countries, the creative class has been identified as a dominant driving force in their economic development, and whereas an emphasis on human capital development over the last 2 decades has resulted in an exponential increase in university graduates as well as opportunities for vocational skills development, and whereas this Executive Council has accepted as part of its mandate to advance a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry, particularly among the youth on the island, which in turn significantly contribute to the economic development of Tobago. Be it resolved that this House support the work of the Executive Council in its attempt to foster a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry on the island, particularly among the youth. And be it further resolved that this House invite the youth of Tobago to embrace the opportunities for development through innovation, creativity, and industry. Assistant Secretary for Education, Innovation, and Energy.
I am indeed happy to again rise to my feet to make my contribution to the motion that has been tabled, and of course to add to what my colleague just presented. Madam Presiding Officer, the motion that has been tabled by the Assistant Secretary for the Division of Community Development, Enterprise Development and Labor is quite timely, and it is in the right season. I start my presentation this evening with an excerpt from the manifesto of the People's National Movement for the election year 2017. And I quote from our political leader, the Honorable Kelvin Charles, Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly and Secretary of the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy. And he said in the manifesto, "On behalf of the Tobago Council of the People's National Movement, I take this opportunity to outline our manifesto for the upcoming elections. I start with a proposition that the best approach to community prosperity and to achieve an enhanced quality of life involves giving to individuals, families, businesses, and community groups the freedom, opportunity, and encouragement to build and secure their own future." End quote. Madam Presiding Officer, every secretary and assistant secretary sitting in this room can tell of the myriad incentives, grants, loans, training programs, and assistance, both past and present, that have been made available and are still available to the citizens of the island of Tobago. All of this in an effort to increase all citizens' way of life, enhance their living conditions, and help them to plan for a better and a secured future. Madam Presiding Officer, as a PNM administration in this space, we continue to work in the interest of the people of Tobago. Though we are constrained by the financial situation of the day, this administration remains committed to servicing all our scholarships, giving grants and loans, introducing incentives, supplying sponsorships, and delivering donations. We are saying again, we will help you to build and secure your future. As a responsible PNM government, Madam Presiding Officer, we understand our responsibility to facilitate development of our human capital, and we will carry on as our founding father has taught us. Therefore, the Tobago House of Assembly continues to be the chief employer, the purchaser of goods and services, and the provider of essential services. The Division of Education, Innovation and Energy builds our schools, refurbishes our institutions of learning, trains our employees, and takes care of the needs of our students and our teachers. All of this, Madam Presiding Officer, as I said, in an effort to make sure that our citizens enjoy the best that the education system can offer. In retrospect, Madam Presiding Officer, this PNM administration has done well. The introduction of GATE has facilitated an increase in the number of students acquiring first degrees, masters, and even doctorates. In 2017, the number of students enrolled in tertiary institutions on the island of Tobago was 1,379, and in 2018, the figure rose to 1,450. Madam Presiding Officer, I can add to that. The number of Tobagonians with degrees that are employed have moved upwards from 5% to 20%, and I can assure you there's a huge, huge increase, 400%. We must also give consideration to our boys and girls, our young people who are studying outside of Trinidad and Tobago. There are many avenues, Madam Presiding Officer, for persons now to develop skills. The Division of Community Development, Enterprise Development and Labor, where my colleague is employed, offers so many classes at our community centers and Y zones. The Division of Education, where I am, we offer training, as I said before, in another presentation in plumbing, masonry, and electrical installation. And there are many vocational skills that are taught, as mentioned, at MIC and NESC. This PNM THA knows what it is about. While we continue to provide for our people, we simultaneously say to the small and micro businesses on this island, the aspiring businessman who is listening today, and all of Tobago, to be brave, and let us work at building the private sector so that greater employment can be created. It is said, and we know the saying, you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. This administration is committed to ensuring that we do all that we can to create and energize the private sector. Madam Presiding Officer, the motion begs of us to explore the creative class as the dominant force that is presently driving economic development in cities of developed countries. This is a term, the term creative class. This term was coined by an urban studies theorist called Richard Florida. Now, this gentleman stated that this creative class includes people who work in science and engineering, architecture and design, education, business, the arts, music, and entertainment, and whose economic function is to create new ideas, new technology, and new creative content. The research shows that persons who align themselves to this group are not traditional persons as mentioned by my colleague. They want to define, as he said, their own hours of work. So they no longer want to be tied to 8 to 4. They do not want to always conform to the norms of society and the status quo. And of course, they are techno-savvy. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago is not void of creative class type individuals. But what we need on this island is more of them. We are proud of our very own Dylan Angus. We are proud of our Sakani Solomon. We are proud of our Asha Mars Lewis. We are proud of our Shannon Walters. We are proud of our June Alfred. We are proud of our Wayne Johns. We are proud of our Jelani Shaws. We are proud of our Gerard Primers. And there are many, many, many others. Tobago will always want, Madam Presiding Officer, a workforce that has degrees and masters and doctorates. Tobago will always want a workforce with talent and skills, but what Tobago really needs in 2019 and beyond is a workforce that possesses the merits identified above and much more. Tobago requires more people that are inventors, more persons with imaginative and creative minds that will see and devise ways to fully utilize our natural resources to marry technology to innovation and develop products and services unique to this place and at a standard that is exportable. Madam Presiding Officer, I am a mother. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and just like when Shumari was 9, she's 9 now. And I know that when my daughter is of age to study, when she's of age to work, as she mentions now, she, like many of our Tobagonians now, would not want to go into the traditional courses of work. And I know for a fact she would not want to work with the THA and work from 8 to 4. And therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, this administration hears the cry of some of our young people out there. We listened, and we continue to work in their interests, because through our efforts, with their support and their assistance, Tobago can have more individuals that are characterized and practice the attributes of the creative class. We outlined in our manifesto to foster innovation through education, hence the remodel of the Division of Education, Youth Affairs and Sport to the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy. The shift of the Tobago Information Technology Limited Center from the Division of Finance to the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy. As we have realigned the center, that is TITL, we have been able to achieve the following. 1, the establishment of an innovation center. 2, through the center, we were able to launch a program in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the STEM program. We did one starting October 1st, 2018. The program is geared towards sparking interest in STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, from an early age through interaction with technology and creating the foundation for innovation, thereby creating the next generation of inventors. During the 6-week period, Madam Presiding Officer, the participants' critical thinking and problem-solving skills were enhanced through the exposure to current technological practices and, of course, to geometric information systems, GIS, and programming and robotics. In the first cycle, Madam Presiding Officer, 34 students, 21 at the primary level and 13 at the secondary level, participated in the STEM program, which ended last year, December 2018. And there was a graduation ceremony to celebrate the rewards of the students who participated in this program. The second cycle, which commenced in February 2000 this year, would see the participation of another 32 students, 17 at the primary level and 15 at the secondary level. In the third cycle, Madam Presiding Officer, an additional module covering drone technology would be added. Madam Presiding Officer, the Innovation Center now offers professional information and communication technology programs geared towards increasing the human resource capacity on the island in the fields of ICT, improving the preparation of the Tobago workforce, particularly in the field of ICT, via training services, and increasing the number of ICT professionals pursuing international ICT certification. Madam Presiding Officer, I can also add that as of December 2018, DATAS, that is a unit at the Division of Education, Innovation, Energy, was able to award funding for 450 young Tobagonians in the study in the areas of culture, the performing arts, technical, vocational studies, communication studies, linguistics, and of course, library science. So therefore, we know the creative class has not been forgotten. Madam Presiding Officer, this effort, as they showed, can be applauded. But as a division through this unit, we are working to ensure that our young people, when they come to choose courses of study, that they choose studies that are in line with what our economic development plan requires. So, Madam Presiding Officer, we are working towards helping our students to choose wisely. We are preparing for the future. In 2018, the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy partnered with Nerds International to host for the first time the Young Innovators Camp, and that was a tremendous success on this island. In January of this year, in January of 2018, I was privileged to journey to Signal Hill, where those students were the only students who embarked on a project to power their library with solar energy. And I was really happy when I was there and I saw the students, you know, running the machines, starting them up. I really felt proud. And our students, because of this, have been exposed to a scale and an area that they can use for the rest of their lives, using solar energy. And we are talking here about the creative class. We are talking here about creating innovation and industry and creativity. And here our young people are engaged in something that they can pursue later on in life. The exposure was indeed there. In January 2019, there was a youth tech workshop for our young boys and girls, and I, as Assistant Secretary of the Division of Education, I look forward to the second leg of Youth Tech and, of course, to a Young Innovators Camp. And, of course, as Assistant Secretary in the Division of Education, Innovation, Energy, and, of course, as a past teacher, I know we like to talk a lot about the curriculum, but through the new curriculum we write, students of the primary school level are continually exposed to areas of the creative arts through VAPA. They are not denied the opportunity to dance, to sing, to do drama. Through the curriculum, from a very tender age, the students are exposed to VAPA through the English language, because you have something called literary appreciation, where they are allowed to read different genres and learn to express themselves through writing. So therefore, the children are not void. The learning is not absent. It just has to be taught in a manner that is well received. Madam Presiding Officer, this PNM administration, led by, of course, our Honorable Mr. Kelvin Charge, a visionary leader, will provide continuously the enabling environment to foster a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry among our youth on this island. All I am asking, and all we are asking, is that our young people come on board, that they grasp every single opportunity, that they move away from the wayside, that they encourage each other to grasp the opportunities as they present themselves, so that all of us can enjoy and have a Tobago that we can enjoy. Madam Presiding Officer, I urge that this House supports the work of this Executive Council as it seeks to achieve the mandate of an innovative, creative, and industrious island, and to cater for the young primary school child that my colleague spoke about, and that we can meet that child's need. It is our job as leaders sitting around this horseshoe to help our young people to find their space and place in this world, and this administration will ensure that it does so. Thank you.
Representative for Palatuvia, Lansumi, Speyside.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding. Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer, for this opportunity to contribute to this motion. I wish to begin by recounting some of my experiences as a young person in Tobago with the Tobago House of Assembly, and how that would have aided in my growth and development. And then juxtapose that with many of my colleagues, many of my peers my age, who somehow, it would appear, have missed either those opportunities to develop and grow, or just didn't care. I wish to go all the way back to the late 1990s, when the Department of Youth was located down at Shaw Park. At that time, Madam Presiding Officer, the division was called Community Development, Youth Affairs and Sport, and the line secretary was Mrs. Miriam Caesar Moore, representing the area of the electoral district, rather, of Bethel, that is now being represented by the mover of this motion. And I start there because that was my first major interaction with any youth department or the THA in any direct way. And I could remember the youth department preparing for what was then the island's first youth debate and sitting. And we will leave school and we will walk down to Shaw Park, and we will be all over the offices. We were managing the project almost autonomously with the guidance of folks like Miss Anne-Marie Degazor. And we had a successful debate. And then sometime again in post about 2001, 2002 thereabout, at Bishop's High School, we decided to have another debate in the house, this time about HIV and AIDS. And so we went to the youth department, and by this time it was the Division of Education, Youth Affairs, and Sport. And the then Chief Secretary, Mr. London, was also the secretary for that division. And we again prepared, we had a debate, we felt like we were on top of the world, we were managing our own affairs, we felt like the youth department was extremely close to us as young people. And so I raise these two examples to say that in reality, executive councils past and present have tried numerous approaches to reach out to our young people in creative ways. But I entered sixth form with 93 persons. And I am doubtful that I can find 20 of that 93 present in Tobago. And I'm doubtful that I can find 50 of that 93 contributing back to the island in some way or the other. And I raise it because while it is great for us to discuss ways of involving our young people, ways of developing the creative sectors so that our young people feel more at home, it means that somewhere along the line we have lost some people. And I dare say we have lost many people. We may not have lost them to bad vices, but we have lost many young people in a way that they are not meaningfully contributing to the island's development as they should. And so the question we must ask ourselves from the get-go is, what else can we do? What more should we be doing? Because if we have all of these wonderful programs and we still have a serious issue with brain drain, and brain drain in our century is not just our young people being absent from the island, but their creative and intelligent and powerful thoughts are not present with us. If that kind of brain drain is still happening, it means that we have to try something or some things differently in order to captivate the imagination of our young people. And that's where we have to start. The motion begins its premise on the fact that the Tobago economy is primarily led by the government, either at this local level, the THA, or the central government. And any economist will tell you that while it is the role of the government to facilitate the economic growth of any space, we really desire stronger private sector development and input. The motion recognizes that around the world, the creative classes are becoming much more dominant. And the move of the motion referenced the Asians, and I'm happy that it did. But the difference between the Asians and us is not that they are brighter than we are. It's not that they are more creative than we are. In fact, I'll be controversial to say, many of the imports we get from Asia sometimes are substandard, low quality. And so it's not that they are more skillful than we are, but it perhaps might be a matter of patriotism. How do we get our people, our young people, where even if the opportunities for them are not available on this island, they can find meaningful ways through our diasporic connections to contribute back to their island? And I think that is something we need to wrap our minds around quickly. We need to also pay some attention to the fact that if we want people to stay here and engage the economy and engage their communities and so on, then we have to make staying here worth their while. For a long time, I have been hearing Tobago's population is around 55,000, 60,000. And Madam Presiding Officer, it's not that we stopped making children. It's not that Tobago men all got impotent overnight. It is not that our schools are empty. But it is that when most of our young people go off to engage institutions abroad, in order to hone their creativity and so on, they end up depositing such creativities, such intelligence, such skills in other places and not giving back as much as they should to this place. I have had many people ask me, why did you waste your time to come back here? But for me, coming back here had to have been my first option because I felt like I was blessed by THA's past, and I'm not so sure by those present. But I certainly have been blessed by the THA, by my community, by my church, by other social institutions like youth clubs. And so I felt I had to give back. Madam Presiding Officer, I see even in the house today, a gentleman, Mr. Lyndon, and I could clearly remember going into Spaceside's old community center as a first former, second former, and going through quizzes on THA history and all of these things. And I see him still here today. But I wasn't the only person there in that room. So why is it from among all of us who were in that room, scores of us as young people who were there, how is it that so many of us did not end up back in a place where we are contributing meaningfully to this Tobago space? And so, to me, that's the direction I would like to take this motion. And a large part of developing our creative class is understanding that we must peg the development of that sector to our education sector. And I listened attentively to the Assistant Secretary, the member for Plymouth Golden Lane, as she spoke about some of the strategies that are being attempted. But we have to do more than that. One, we have to ensure that our young people and our young professionals, and I've said it in this house, find it easy to either start businesses, develop businesses. We need to ensure that they find it easier to have access to homes. I spoke about that home saving plan that was initiated by a prior Secretary for Finance, and the fact that it seemed to have just fallen away into nothingness. These are initiatives that we have to employ so that people will want to return here and live here. Just recently, I was in Moriah doing a program with some young men at the Adventist Church in Moriah. And I asked, where were the young men who were in the late 20s and 30s? There were only 2 in the room, and I was one. And I asked, where were they? All the young men were in the early 20s and were teenagers. And the response from the elders of the church were, well, they went off to study, and they have not returned. And so I asked the elder, I said, do you engage in technology, have video conferencing perhaps? Do you invite them back to fly over for a weekend to lecture to your young people, to share their new thoughts with their young people? Because the truth is, on this island, we have to get creative in order to attract and in order to engage the creative minds of our young people, who, if we are honest, are choosing to stay away than to stay here. And notice I've been saying, staying here does not mean being physically present here, but it means ensuring that you are contributing back to this space. And that has to be more than remittances. It has to be more than sending some money occasionally through Western Union. It has to be, how do I, when I would have benefited from state subsidies, from state programs, from community programs, from the local church, from the youth clubs, from the Nenen and the Godfather and the fisherman down the road, after I've benefited from them, I must be conscious and patriotic enough to turn back, to look back, and to say, let me redeposit something in the bank that is Tobago. I also want to bring to our attention, Madam Presiding Officer, that while we are speaking about engaging our young people and supporting the Executive Council in their strategies and policies, I must ask, where is the new Tobago youth policy? I must ask, because I know that there was one that would have expired. I know that the former secretary, Mr. Cadet, had prepared, a team preparing a draft, and after the draft was prepared, then what's next? Now, I know that the national youth policy would have expired sometime around 2016, 2017, but in reality, the THA and Tobago does not have to wait on a new national youth policy to have our own. And so we need a new policy. That old policy had spoken to things like the youth department taking control of Madden House, the Great House in Belgarden, the old youth camp up at Mount St. George. Now up at Mount St. George we have CCC at Madden House, that's under the Division of Education. And then Belgarden, I believe, needs repair. And so what is or where rather is this overarching policy framework? Because this overarching policy framework should guide the THA away from just being a place of 8 to 4 jobs. And I heard the Assistant Secretary speaking about the creativity in her young child and saying that, you know, she's almost certain that her young child will not want an 8 to 4 with the THA. But my question is, why should the THA be defined as a place for just 8 to 4 workers? Why are we, if we are talking creativity, and we are talking about the productivity of those who work from home, and research will show that people who work from home generally tend to be more productive than those who work from the offices. And if we are acknowledging that, and if we are acknowledging that some of us like to work in the wee hours of the morning, as I heard the move of the motion, then what stops the THA from saying to at least some of its contracted employees that they can work from home, that they can be productive from on the fields, that they don't necessarily need to show up at 8 to 4, but we will need them at 3 p.m. and we'll need them at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. and at 3 o'clock in the morning. What is there to make us demand from our public servants that if you need to be, or if you desire to be an administrator in 2019, you better be able to send an email from your phone. If you're an administrator in the THA in 2019 and you can't send an email from your phone, or read an email from your phone, or write a letter, or write a communique from your phone, then it means that you have no business being in the public service. And I say that loudly and hopefully clearly. Because if we're talking about developing the creative sector and the creative class, then we must hold our own employees under the THA to such levels of creativity, to such levels of innovation, and to such levels of technological inputs. We simply have to. We can't desire that creative class and the dominance of that creative class for Tobago and simultaneously be stuck in our old ways. Prior to teaching, getting into teaching in 2009, I worked for a short time as a communication officer with the then Secretary Groom Duke. And while working there, one of the things that always riled me up was the fact that I was working there with public servants, with contracted employees, who just seemed unwilling to try things a new way. As far as they are concerned, this is how we have been doing it, and this is how we will be doing it. And of course, if you bounce up on a young upstart like myself, then I would tell you, then you don't have to do it that way. There is a better way to do it, a more efficient way to do it, and of course, an argument will ensue. And then I decided that the public service at that level really wasn't for me, and went into teaching, which really was a pay cut. But it allowed me to interact with young people in a way that I could teach them how to harness their creativity, how to use their intelligences differently, and how to engage the world. I listened to the move of the motion speak glowingly about the young man from Black Rock and how focused he was and how knowledgeable he was about what he wanted to do and what he wanted to contribute to Tobago. But can I tell you, all of our children are that way. But the question is, what happens when they become a teenager? What happens when they become a young adult? What is it that makes them turn away from this place when they become an adult? And that, to me, is at the root of this motion. And so, we have to do more, and I concur with that. We have to do more as individuals, as representatives, as people of influence, as community leaders, in getting our young people to not just engage the services of the Tobago House of Assembly, but to engage their social institutions. I wish, Madam Presiding Officer, that pegged to the GATE program was a mandatory requirement that anybody who accessed GATE had to do some mandatory volunteer hours with some social institution. I wish that was the case, because I really don't think somebody should get access to taxpayers' money for their education, and all you do upon graduating, and even while you're studying, is finding the latest fad to go by, to to Instagram, WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, post a live, look glamorous, do your hair, do your nails. And then as soon as you get back to Tobago, if you come, you try to get a vehicle, move out of your parents' house because you find your parents looking at you too much. You even walk downstairs by your parents, you find a place to rent so you can live your reckless life, and then you contribute zero back to the social institutions. You don't even get up on a weekend and go to church anymore because you reach bigger than God. You don't get up and go to the police club down the road that's struggling. On Tuesday night, I had a meeting with some fishermen in Charlottesville. And I know Charlottesville as a place with many, many university graduates. And in a room filled with fishermen, we spent close to 45 minutes debating who will want to volunteer to be a secretary of an association they're trying to form, who will want to be a vice president, because everybody is backing out because they're afraid that they don't have the capacity. And I'm asking, where are our young professionals? Where are our young people? Where are our creative minds who are supposed to get involved and say, I am going to partner with my daddy or my mommy in the fishing association and help them get to the next level? Why in 2019 a fishing association cannot have a Facebook account? Why in 2019 a fishers association rather can be engaged in the technology to show the world and to show their members new fishing techniques? And so the question is, how do we get our young people to come back and redeposit in this place called Tobago? And I will admit, it is frustrating. It is frustrating when you encounter a young man or a young woman and their biggest life goal is a morning walk. It is frustrating when you encounter a young man or a young woman whose biggest life goal is to become whatever they call it now, to stunt, to have some big links around their necks, to have the car drop low and tinted darkly. That cannot be the ambition of our creative minds. We have tried a lot as a THA. THA past, THA present, the central government. Government goes, government comes, new ideas are piled on the table, old ideas are dusted off and tried anew. And if we are trying all of these things and we still have leakage of our creative resources away from us, then it means that we have not yet tried what can ultimately work. And so, what are those things that may be able to work? A month ago, we discussed the issue of a Tobago University. And perhaps the time has come for us to have somewhere, perhaps of a THTI, a partnership with either Berkeley College of the Arts or Savannah College of the Arts, perhaps whoever is the best in the world at arts in education. The time has come maybe for us to have some real partnerships with some of those people. We need to also look at the issue of promotion. How do we promote our people who are talented? And promoting our people who are talented doesn't need to cost us a jazz festival. Promoting people who are talented really just requires talented YouTubers and people who are talented on social media interfaces. Because you will see people from Africa, from the continent of Africa, and other parts of the third world, who are getting new music that the world wasn't paying attention to before, new dance moves that the world wasn't paying attention to before, getting them and popularizing them by way of social media. So we need to do more promotion of local art forms and encourage our local artists and creative minds to not be afraid of the use of social media. Don't be afraid of it at all. Use it. Be willing to even share aspects of your life and experience with the world. The world wants to see those things. We need to consider for our community centers and gymnasiums and so on, having public studios. And I know the Secretary with responsibility for youth spoke about having consultations about having an indoor facility. And I would like to posit that perhaps some of these facilities can have spaces where our local musicians, our orators, our spoken word artists, and so on, can go into a space and have recording done. That is something that is extremely expensive, and the average young person on the island who can sing really well or who is a genius poet may not be able to afford studio fees. And I don't think that there is necessarily a grant somewhere around for that, or that we need to have a grant for that. But we could have public studios as an option. Some countries have done that. And that's one way of getting people to have their craft polished and so on. We need to also look at how we teach. And I need to speak to that for a little while. Because, Madam Presiding Officer, unfortunately, we do have some teachers and educators who are just not creative. That's the reality. It's unfortunate, but it is a reality. I have taught in the same school with some. I have seen some in other schools, and who are just unwilling to be creative so long as I finish the curriculum on time, and I teach what I suppose that's what CXC wants, then I good. But that cannot be the way we engage our young creative minds. It really cannot. It has to be more, there must be more than that, Madam Presiding Officer. And so our teachers must use the technologies that are available in the classroom. I have had classes at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the night from my iPad and while at home. And while my students are at home, and I'm talking about secondary school students, and we're studying and preparing for exams using that method. Teachers just have to do it. And I know that you're not being paid to do that, but you really just have to, if you want your charges to become better than you are. Just this morning, one of my former students sent me a message asking me for advice on what she should do as a teacher, because she just got employed to teach at MIC. Now, this young lady spent the sum total of 1 day in sixth form and walked out of the school. And my then principal was obviously mad with even me, because she said, Mr. Augustine, you are encouraging slackness. How could you encourage this girl to show up to school in a uniform that her parents paid for? We sent down her name to the Division of Education, got clearance, and she spent 1 day and left. And my response was, Miss, well, she doesn't like it here. She doesn't want to be here. And my principal couldn't understand that. The girl wanted to do underwater welding. And guess what? She left, she pursued it, and now she has gotten a job to teach other young people welding. And she was messaging me to ask what advice should she take as a teacher so that she will be a good teacher. And my point is, that's the kind of creativity that we have to generate on the island. And that requires some measure of boldness. It requires us to step outside of the box and outside of tradition. It requires us to look at perhaps the color black and identify it as something else. It requires us to not see things the same way we have always seen things. But most importantly, it requires us to rattle some people who are stuck in their ways and who thinks that there is just one way, a singular way, by which we can develop. We have to rattle those people. We have to challenge those people. And so I want to give two charges. 2 charges. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I'll wrap up. I know I'm alone today, and I may not get the benefit of additional time. So but I want to give 2 charges. I want to give 2 charges.
Unfortunately, you have. Let me just go ahead and request the extra time. Your time has expired. Will someone move a motion to give him extra time?
Madam Presiding Officer, I move that time for the member be extended by a further 10 minutes.
Members, it is proposed that the speaking time for the member be extended by a further 10 minutes. All in favor? Aye. Any against? Member, your speaking time has been extended.
Thank you for being true to perhaps one of your favorite words, member for Backlet, Mount St. George. Thank you for being magnanimous. Yes, so I want to give 2 charges. The first must be to our young people, especially those who are unattached. If by any chance you're passing by the television, you're passing by the computer, and you just hear this session going on, and you paid a little attention, I am begging of you, engage your community in more ways than just sitting by the roadside and liming away most of your day. You can do much more than that, especially you young men. I have had 2 young men from my community in Speyside who would have come to my office and they said, Farley, I hear the government plan to free up the wheat thing, so we ain't waiting. I want your help with organizing some proposal and so on, because we have the business idea that we want to do with this wheat thing. Let me organize it so when it passes, we first out the block. I am saying that's the kind of creative mind I want to engage from you. Don't just sit on the block and waste it. Contribute, engage somebody. And more than that, if we look at how they operate there on the block, I mean, I don't know who gives a roll call. I don't know who says what time they should arrive. I don't know who chairs the meetings on the block. I don't know if there is an agenda set. I don't know if somebody sets out the goal for the Association of Block Limers. But guess what? They all get there at the time they're supposed to get there. They are all very much engaged. Even if they're debating, they're engaged. And they all decide within the matter of one evening to go and thief somebody mango from off the tree, or go and pick coconut there, or to go to the fete tomorrow night. They all make that decision in one space. Perhaps we might need to learn from them and their lack of formality and the casualness with which they engage each other. Perhaps we need to become a lot more casual in engaging them if we are to get them to reciprocate such engagement. But we have to do something about the community of block limers who ain't going anywhere, they ain't migrating, they're not carrying their creativity and develop anybody else's place, as I spoke about before, but they're not sharing their creativity with us either. They're just sitting there and liming their lives away. And secondly, I want to charge us to not be afraid to do things differently. And I hear they talk about business as unusual. And I will tell you, I would love to see more business as unusual. Because I believe that our situation is at an emergency level. Whether we like to admit it or not, it is. And so we have to move much more expeditiously in trying to harness those creative skills of all of our young people. We have to find more creative ways to get them back to this place. And God knows it cannot be the age-old, we got to give you a work, because we can't employ everybody. And it can't be, we got to give you a grant, because we can't give everybody a grant either. And it can't be that you're going to be able to start a business and after 2 months you make profit, because that's not how it works in real life either. But it has to be something a lot more deeper than those things. And that has to be patriotism. And so I encourage us all to be patriotic to this space called Tobago. I encourage my fellow Tobagonians in and out of this house to be patriotic, to become engaged, and to ensure that we have the Tobago that we want, the Tobago that we desire, the Tobago that is a shining example for the rest of the world. Because I am honestly tired talking about Singapore. I don't want to hear another example from Singapore. When I am certain Tobago could become the next textbook example for how post-colonial societies can become economic success stories, can become social success stories, and can become leaders in the world. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to contribute to what I consider to be a very timely and important motion. And of course, I want to congratulate the speakers that went before me, of course, the member for Bethel Mount Irvin, the member for Plymouth Golden Lane, and of course the member for Palatovial and some Speyside. You know, as we look at this topic of innovation, I think sometimes we tend to want to innovate the word innovation. But today I want to be very simple and focused in my approach to this motion. Because of course, innovation simply means change. It means doing things differently. Of course, acknowledging that the current way you might be doing something may have been the best way prior to the time, but at this present point in time, there might be a better way. Or there might be other things that we can be doing to benefit not only the personalities involved, but of course, the collective public. So, Madam Presiding Officer, innovation is all around us. Whether we like it or not, things change, people change, circumstances change, organizations change. The entire world is changing. And if I were to use examples, even the way people dress, Madam Presiding Officer, has changed significantly. And I want to tell a little story. Because I remember at the age of 10 years old, I attended a church. I wouldn't say which church at this point in time. But you know, back then, most people wore soft pants to church. Pants like this and what, well, not so much what Farley had. But soft pants. And your nice little soft shirt and your soft shoes. Almost, as a matter of fact, in no church, I would like to say in no church at that point in time would you see young men wearing sneakers and jeans and that kind of stuff. So of course, one Sunday morning, and most people at that time thought it was the devil who choked me, said, "Ansel, wear jeans to church this morning." And of course, I played the drums, and I just find, you know, I wanted to look a little different and be more comfortable playing the drums. So the first response, I was spoken to by the head of worship at that point in time. That was the first pushback. That, you know, jeans or the dress code is unbecoming of a worshiper. That was the response I got. And of course, I did it the following Sunday. Because you know me, once you push back, I tend to, you know, push back as well. I was a little mannish and a little bit rude, not much, back then. So of course, I push back and I decide I'm wearing my jeans, me and care what this is. Because as far as I'm concerned, holiness has nothing to do with your dress code. It has to do with your lifestyle and your heart condition, etc. Eventually, I was almost banned from the worship team for wearing jeans, banned from playing the drums. And I want to give all of you a challenge. Go to any church, whether it be Adventist church, Methodist church, Pentecostal church, Baptist church, and you will guarantee, I can guarantee you, that you would find a number of young men wearing all kinds of clothing besides soft pants. You will find jeans, you will find sneakers, you will find all kinds of clothing, Madam Presiding Officer. So of course, things change, people change, even the very hairstyles. Back then when I was a child, the most popular female hairstyle that I knew about was the roll. Yeah, the women long time, they would straighten their hair and they would roll it. When you have a roll, I mean you're going to a wedding or you have some big event. But of course today we have bang, we have pixie cut. We have all kinds of other hairstyles, Madam Presiding Officer. And that to me is innovation at work. But of course it's easy to innovate when it comes to dress code, when it comes to the way we operate, the way we socialize, when you look at the way we fet, the way in which we conduct our carnival activities, we can see innovation at work, even the way we conduct relationships, Madam Presiding Officer. Back then, in my day, when I had, back then we spoke on the phone, Madam Presiding Officer. I remember speaking to girls for 2 hours on the phone sometimes, 3 hours on the phone all night. These days we messaging. We could message all day. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine told me recently he's annoyed whenever his girlfriend called him to talk on the phone. She could message him all the time, but when she called him, he could only talk for 5 minutes. In other words, the days for talking for hours on the phone, those days done. Innovation, Madam Presiding Officer, at work. So it's easy to innovate when it comes to certain things. When it comes to our way of life, when it comes to how we eat, it's easy to innovate. But for some reason, when it comes to development of our space, of our island, of our country, development in terms of the world, especially in what we might consider to be developing countries, innovation, doing things differently, advancing in terms of change becomes very difficult, Madam Presiding Officer. And the question is why, and I will delve into that as I get into this presentation. So let's look at Tobago and let's ask ourselves the question, where are we and what have we done over the years to support innovation, to support creativity? And I want to boast, Madam Presiding Officer, that this administration, this PNM administration over the last 18 years has done significantly well. And we have made significant strides in terms of attempting to position the people of Tobago to be more creative and more innovative. And I want to give you the facts, Madam Presiding Officer, because the facts are that over the last 18 years, we have provided significant opportunities to Tobagonians in terms of facilities. And when we examine the Tobago space, we will recognize that this Tobago situation is far better than that in Trinidad. It's far better than the situation in any other Caribbean island when it comes to the presence of community facilities, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, this administration must be credited for that. When it comes to human capital development, Madam Presiding Officer, over the last 5 years alone, this administration has trained over 5,000 individuals in vocational skills. And we're talking about innovative areas like natural jewelry making, bread cakes and pastries, Indian delicacies, art and craft, a number of areas, Madam Presiding Officer, we have provided the training. In terms of tertiary education, it was the People's National Movement that opened the gate. And of course, here in Tobago, the Tobago House of Assembly went a step further by affording Tobagonians the opportunity to get a second bite at the cherry in terms of financial assistance for tertiary education. And therefore, at this point in time, as my colleague previously said, the amount of individuals in Tobago, in the working population with degrees, Madam Presiding Officer, has increased from 5% in 2001 to 20% when we last checked in 2016, Madam Presiding Officer. And again, this administration must be credited for that. Let's talk about entrepreneurship. What have we done, Madam Presiding Officer? And of course, entrepreneurship is a critical part of innovation, because I tend to believe that innovation should be driven mostly by the private sector. Because when you look at the public sector, apart from the previous central government from 2010 to 2015, under the leadership of Kamla Prasad Bisesa, apart from them innovating new ways to be corrupt and new ways to mismanage, the public sector is not necessarily known for being innovative or being creative, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, that is not a unique thing in Trinidad and Tobago. That is a feature of public sectors across the world, Madam Presiding Officer. As a matter of fact, one of the largest areas of spending in terms of innovation and in terms of new technology in the world has to do with defense spending. Of course, large countries like the United States, like Great Britain, even the Russians, the Chinese, etc., they spend billions of dollars every year on defense. Yeah? Whether it's new drones, new jets, new missiles, new forms of weapons, etc. And of course, that can only be possible with the advancement in technologies spearheaded, Madam Presiding Officer, by the private sector. So the public sector by itself cannot, Madam Presiding Officer, engage in innovation. And therefore, I want to congratulate the Division of Finance and Enterprise Development, not Enterprise Development anymore, Finance and the Economy, of course under the leadership of Secretary Jack, for the amount of funding over the last few years they have spent on giving to Tobagonians grants and in some cases loans to ensure that they put their ideas, their business ideas, their creative ideas into action and into practice, Madam Presiding Officer. And that to me is innovation at work. So of course, the other question, having asked ourselves where we are and what have we done, the next question, Madam Presiding Officer, is where must we go? And of course, this administration, as part of our manifesto, we placed tremendous emphasis on the issue of innovation, Madam Presiding Officer. Because we recognize that in order for Tobago to really flourish and in order for Tobago to really move forward as we ought to engage in activities that we may not necessarily have been engaging in the past. And I'm talking about activities in terms of tourism, in terms of agriculture, in terms of renewable energy, and in terms of waste management. And I'm going to delve into some examples as I get deeper into the presentation, Madam Presiding Officer. So of course, this administration is at this point in time engaged in the process of establishing an innovation unit, or a Department of Innovation. And of course, that department or that unit will have as its first responsibility to establish a policy for innovation in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer. Apart from that, this administration also plans to collaborate with tertiary institutions to encourage and support innovation in Tobago, including our young entrepreneurs, of course. In addition to that, we plan to provide financial and technical support to encourage innovation in key sectors of the economy, again, tourism and agriculture, which we identify as the mainstays of the Tobago economy, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, in the very near future, we intend to develop awards and incentives to encourage innovation in the Tobago space. And of course, as well, we want to support the commercialization of innovative technologies, Madam Presiding Officer. So, is innovation, especially in the areas of agriculture and tourism, already happening in Tobago? And the question is yes. And I want to point to some of those examples where young, creative Tobagonians discovered challenges that we all know about. The fact that Tobago cannot feed itself. The fact that Tobago is importing most of the things we eat from Trinidad. The fact that most of us believe that if, God forbid, the sea bridge collapses totally, that Tobago will starve. Those, Madam Presiding Officer, are serious issues that must be challenged. And therefore, I am heartened I was heartened in 2013 when I discovered a young man by the name of Akil Jofield operating quietly in a community in Mount Pleasant on a small piece of land, no more than 3,000 square feet in size. And he has been engaged even before then in hydroponics. And of course, for all of us should know that involves growing crops, mostly lettuce, pak choy, and of course they have managed to include other crops into that same technology, such as tomatoes, sweet peppers, etc., utilizing no soil, simply water, and of course the necessary nutrients to get the right balance. And that affords that young man the opportunity, and I don't have the figures, obviously, but it affords him the opportunity to grow a significantly large number of crops on what I would consider to be a very small parcel of land. As I said, no more than 3,000 square feet. There are other Tobagonians, such as Mr. Lafond, who has taken it a step further by engaging in something called aquaponics. And of course, that is almost the same process, but instead of adding artificial nutrients and chemicals, that system relies on the rearing of fish, in most cases tilapia, and of course the fecal matter from the fish, when you feed the fish, and of course going through that entire cycle, the fecal matter from the fish is what is expected to provide the nutrients to the plants. And of course what these individuals are doing is demonstrating to Tobagonians, especially those young persons who are interested in agriculture, that there are ways in which we can maximize the potential of agriculture, right? Utilizing less strenuous means. Of course, the challenge for most of us today, why we may not be interested in agriculture, is because we see agriculture as hard work. The hoe, the fork, going on our knees to pull weeds from crops and that kind of stuff. And of course, these individuals are demonstrating that there are other innovative and creative means available to us Tobagonians that we can in fact pursue agriculture right here in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer. So innovation is at work. And therefore, as a Tobago House of Assembly, as I said before, through the establishment of an innovation unit, we will be seeking out the ideas of young Tobagonians. So I want to put Tobagonians on notice, especially those who feel they're bright. Yeah? There are a number of us who consider ourselves to be intellectuals. Of course, you have your degree. But many times, we go off to school, we study, we get our degrees, which to me involves knowledge most of the time and maybe in some cases some practical experience. And we think the next thing we're supposed to do is to come to sit down on an 8 to 4 job. Yeah? But cars does work, fridges work, stove does work, TVs does work, yeah? This microphone does work, iPad work, telephones work. But for some reason, our young Tobagonians are only interested in getting a job and not necessarily working. So I'm saying it's time for us as a people, as a young people especially, to change our mindset, to begin to expand our creative minds, to begin to put our ideas on paper and put them into practice, Madam Presiding Officer. So innovation must be a collaborative effort. It cannot be the Tobago House of Assembly alone. As a matter of fact, the main responsibility of this innovation unit that will be established this year is to facilitate, to provide the necessary funding when it is required. Of course, the Division of Finance will continue to provide the funding to entrepreneurs. Of course, land management, as far as possible, will continue to provide land and the necessary space required for agriculture and other such projects that Tobagonians may seek to be engaged in. But I'm saying the responsibility of the Tobago House of Assembly through this Department of Innovation is mostly to facilitate. And therefore, in terms of bringing the ideas to the table, in terms of going out there and getting the job done, in terms of bringing the action, the responsibility is that of us all, Tobagonians, young minds, creative minds, entrepreneurial minds, those with business ideas. We are looking for you. And therefore, it is important for us, Madam Presiding Officer, to change our mindset. Because, of course, the member for Palatovia, Lansam, Speyside mentioned the fact that here in Tobago, our young persons, our young men particularly, prefer to get a morning walk, get off that walk by 8 a.m., 9 a.m. for the latest in some cases, and then go home, sit on the block for the entire day. They have tea on the block, breakfast on the block, lunch on the block, and even dinner on the block, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, the mindset even have impacts on those who may not be on the block, because there are a number of us young Tobagonians. Some of us have O-levels, 5, 6, 7 O-levels. Some of us bachelor's degrees, some master's degrees. Of course, many of us are already employed in the THO or wherever. But the reality is that in most cases, a number of us are operating in jobs that are not specific to the knowledge that we would have attained at university. And I'm saying, therefore, we have a responsibility to put that knowledge to use, Madam Presiding Officer. We have a responsibility to ensure that we contribute to Tobago's development by looking at Tobago, questioning the management and the development of Tobago, understanding and discovering the challenges that Tobago faces at this point in time, and bring the solutions to the table, Madam Presiding Officer. And that is innovation at work. So I want to suggest that while we may want to, as the member for Plymouth Golden Lane suggested, encourage our young persons coming up in secondary schools who are now pursuing tertiary education, we may want to encourage them to pursue degrees in non-traditional areas. Of course, in my time, everybody wanted you to become a doctor or a lawyer. Nothing else was really accepted. I think to some extent, it was okay to be an engineer. But mostly, Madam Presiding Officer, it was doctor or lawyer. And therefore, the time has come for us to understand that there are significant opportunities for development in Tobago outside of those areas. Because the last time I checked the hospital secretary for health, we have enough doctors. The last time I checked, well, I don't go near the courthouse, but the last time I did my research, we have more than enough lawyers, Madam Presiding Officer. As a matter of fact, my information is that there are lawyers who have jobs that have nothing to do with law, Madam Presiding Officer. So we have enough lawyers. We have enough doctors. I am not so certain we have enough marine scientists or marine biologists or persons trained in waste management, especially the new ways to deal with waste in terms of recycling, or persons trained in clean renewable energy, whether it be solar energy or wind energy or wave energy. I am not so certain, Madam Presiding Officer, that we have sufficient persons trained in those areas. And therefore, we must not only encourage our persons to get involved in those areas, but I'm saying more than degrees, more than papers from institutions throughout the world, we need action, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, I want to encourage us all as Tobagonians to act not only in the best interest of yourself, but in the best interest of Tobago. And therefore, as I close, I want to say that I support the motion. As I said before, it was a very timely one. But this issue of innovation, in order for us to successfully develop our tourism sector, using new methods, new approaches, yeah, where is the Tobagonian who would come forward with a proposal or an idea to the Secretary for Finance to be funded for something new, something different? Maybe cabins up in the bush that are solar powered. Yeah? Where are the new ideas in terms of recycling? I am aware that in Tobago at this point in time, a voluntary organization, Yahweh Foundation, collects plastic bottles, plastic plates. Yeah? A number of individuals cooperate with them. Persons residing in the community of Buku, some from Mount Pleasant, some from Old Grange, persons from as far as Blackrock, bring their plastics, drop it off at the community center in Buku, and guess where it is sent, Madam Presiding Officer? Straight off to Trinidad. And I'm saying, therefore, we as Tobagonians must understand that there are opportunities in that regard, and therefore, there must be people in Tobago with the wherewithal. And of course, if you don't have the funding, as I said before, the Department of Innovation, one of its main responsibilities will be to provide the necessary support, technically or financially, or where else required, Madam Presiding Officer. So therefore, as I said before, I support this motion, and I look forward to the Tobago House of Assembly continuing to do its part. Of course, I am particularly excited about the establishment of this innovation unit, but I'm saying the people of Tobago, especially the young people, must be willing to come forward with your creative ideas and must be willing to look beyond the ordinary and think outside of the box, Madam Presiding Officer. There are a number of challenges for us to resolve. We want to be able to feed Tobago, not necessarily by plowing and hoeing, as I said before, but of course, aquaponics and hydroponics are things that we can in fact consider here in Tobago on a very large scale. In addition to that, we want our tourism sector to be very competitive. We might have missed the sandals opportunity, but I'm saying there are tourists coming from all over the world who may not necessarily want to stay in any hotel, but maybe cabins up in the woods that are solar powered. Where are the Tobagonians with such ideas, Madam Presiding Officer? In addition to that, the way in which we handle our waste, the way in which we create energy, Tobago is ripe for the taking in terms of clean, renewable energy. And therefore, I look forward, as I said before, to Tobagonians coming forward with their ideas so that we could delve into other sectors and create other opportunities. I thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Assistant Secretary of Community Development, Enterprise Development and Labor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Having regard for all that was said by those who would have contributed to this debate, I now consider myself twice as blessed. First, to have been given the opportunity to read this motion in this House. Secondly, to have had the overwhelming support, not just of my colleagues, but of the member opposite. And I want that to really go down in history. Because whereas our past experiences would have proven that we would have agreed on some areas and disagreed on a vast majority, I can say with certainty today, what the member opposite would have articulated was overwhelming support and would have further punctuated the discussions with sound ideas and with suggestions that we will happily take on board and extend further a hand of fellowship, having heard him use the Christian colloquialism, a hand of fellowship, so that we can establish, as it were, a task force that will derive not just a Tobago charter of a national youth development policy, but a working, applicable implementation framework that would allow for the people of Tobago to derive all of the benefits of which we earlier spoke. And so, member, excite yourself as I'm exciting myself. Madam Presiding Officer, it leaves nothing else for me to say. We continue to work hand in hand with community groups. We continue to roll out our youth talk back, community conversations with young people to hear from them. We continue to engage the Bring It series that would allow for persons to posit their ideas and share their opinions. We continue to partner with the National Crime Prevention Program. We continue to engage conversations about health and wellness and innovation as it regards to alternative medicines and the likes. And we continue to do all of that because we understand, as I would have stated, that while Rome was not built in a day, it was certainly built day by day. And so it pleases me immensely to lay to this House for support and consideration, or rather consideration and support, this motion which has been laid before us. That whereas the Tobago economic development has been primarily driven by the combination of efforts of the Tobago House of Assembly and the central government, and whereas in many newly developed cities and countries, the creative class has been identified as a dominant driving force in their economic development, and whereas an emphasis on human capital development over the past 2 decades has resulted in an exponential increase in university graduates, as well as opportunities for vocational skill development, and whereas the Executive Council has accepted as part of its mandate to advance a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry, particularly among the youth on the island, which would in turn significantly contribute to the economic development of Tobago, be it resolved that this House support the work of the Executive Council in its attempt to foster a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry on the island, particularly among the youth. And be it further resolved that this House invite the youth of Tobago to embrace the opportunities for development through innovation, creativity, and industry. This is my plea as I seek to insist upon persons recognizing that we are not just a drop in the ocean, but we are actually the ocean confined in a drop. I thank you.
Honorable members, the question put, whereas Tobago's economic development has been primarily driven by a combination of efforts by the Tobago House of Assembly and the central government, and whereas in many newly developed cities and countries, the creative class has been identified as a dominant driving force in their economic development, And whereas an emphasis on human capital development over the last 2 decades has resulted in an exponential increase in university graduates, as well as opportunities for vocational skills development. And whereas this Executive Council has accepted as part of its mandate to advance a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry, particularly among the youth on the island, which would in turn significantly contribute to the economic development of Tobago. Be it resolved that this House support the work of the Executive Council in its attempt to foster a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry on the island, particularly among the youth. And be it further resolved that this House invite the youth of Tobago to embrace the opportunities for development through innovation, creativity, and industry. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it. This motion is now carried. Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I move that this House now stand adjourned to a date to be fixed.
Members, the question is that this House now stand adjourned for a date to be fixed. All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? This House now stand adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Sitting, aye.
Even in the midst of the Carnival festivities, the work of the Legislature continues with the 23rd sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly. And it is perhaps timely that the motion during this season of culture and creativity places emphasis on the creative sector and acknowledges its potential to be a driving force in the economic development, especially among the youth. Assemblyman Shumari Hector will move the motion requesting the House to support the work of the Executive Council in fostering a culture of innovation, creativity, and industry, and to encourage the youth of Tobago to embrace all the opportunities. As presiding officer, I wish you a safe and enjoyable season and invite you to include us by taking the time to follow another debate on your future in chambers on Tobago Channel 5 or on Facebook or YouTube social media platforms from 1:30 p.m. this Thursday, 28th of February. See you there.